Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to make this a little bit quick. We don't want to take up too much time uh, about this new regulation. So we'll kind of go over a little bit about where we've been, where we are going, and what does it mean to you. And if you have any questions, just put it in the chat. I'll read them out to Mark as we go along. And yeah, we try to make this a little bit interactive as possible. If we can get through the whole thing without any questions, that's fine too. But just to give you a little bit of background about the show that we normally do, this isn't our regularly scheduled program. We usually run the China Art of Law webinar series, which you can also find on YouTube, recorded and uploaded for your convenience. And you can just go into YouTube, search up China Art of Law, I put it there in the pink circle. And we talk about a lot of issues. And actually, our next episode is this Friday. It's about employment crisis in China. All right, so Mark, let's get to it then. I want to first start off with where we were in context of this new cosmetics regulation or this animal testing regulation that was just passed. Maybe you can give us a very quick history lesson for some of the major milestones as we've come here today.
Okay, so thanks, Sean. So prior to 2014, it was always the case that you required mandatory animal testing for all types of cosmetics, and cosmetics are quite broadly identified under Chinese law. And so special use, and they've also recently narrowed the number of categories of special use. So special use are things which are like skin whitener, sunscreen, perm, bleach for the hair, like hair dye. And so everything else is non-special use. So moisturizers, shampoo, conditioners, blush, those kind of things, eyeliner, they're all non-special use. But back in 2014, everything was tested. And I think, one of the reasons was that this was considered a little bit of she doesn't hear anything. Sean, somebody can't say they can hear us.
Yeah. Can everyone hear us? If you cannot hear us, okay.
Okay,
right.
Now it works. Okay, I'll start from the top because I guess when we put it up. But so basically, before 2014, China required animal testing for all types of cosmetics. And in China, we have quite a broad definition of cosmetics. And we separate it into non-special use and special use. Special use is things that could really affect human health. So this is perming products, hair dye, bleach, skin whitener, sunscreen. So quite a narrow ambit, also has been recently reduced. And then non-special use are all the others like shampoo, conditioner, moisturizer, etc. So back in 2014, there was an exemption for non-special use cosmetic products. And these products, it sounds here like it was the same thing, but it actually wasn't. So there were two. Firstly, cross-border e-commerce. And when we say cross-border e-commerce, it has to be really the real cross-border e-commerce. So it has to be like Tmall Global or JD Global. It didn't really affect direct sales or Daigou sales, etc. They just flew under the radar. So the real cross-border e-commerce, you could send stuff over. And that was, I think, because it was seen as a way of competing with the Chinese tourists going overseas and spending all that money in duty-free. Better that they, buy on the cross-border e-commerce. And then the second one, which was the bigger one in 2014, that was actually, they had a limited locally manufactured product. You could get an exemption if you passed a safety exemption. And so what this meant was a number of cruelty-free organizations like Leaping Bunny, they started some pilot projects as well. So a lot of companies moved to local domestic manufacturing under an exemption. Now, in China, we have the NMPA, who's the national medical, the people who take care of drugs and all these kind of things. And they're the ones that monitor the testing, which are done by laboratories that are approved by them. But in addition, customs and other authorities, they still have a right to engage in post-market testing. And so post-market testing, we haven't seen an exemption yet. but we haven't really seen it in real life either for many, many, many years. So post-market testing is just if there's a recall or there's a problem and people think that there's a risk to human health, they may also engage in animal testing. So this exemption was for locally manufactured products. A good example was, I think, like Avon. Avon was bought by Natura, a Brazilian cosmetics giant who has a very strong cruelty-free background, and they required Avon then to switch to locally manufactured under an exemption. Okay, and then I think now the new one what we have, it was already a bit foreshadowed, but you know, we've been writing articles for the last 10 years that animal testing will stop. So I always became a little bit suspicious that it was never going to stop. But I think, you know, China was a bit under pressure from, you know, various countries around the world and also WTO, that this was no longer really about testing on animals. It was really about a bit of a trade barrier. And so the new provision that we've seen, it has eased up animal testing, at least in, you know, theory, for non-special use imported cosmetic products. And so for a lot of you know, cosmetic brands, I think if you look at China, cosmetics may be the sector, you know, in common with social media, which has really been held off. So we've had some very large foreign brands dominate the market, and a lot of those brands were willing to do the animal testing, and they may say things like, we don't test on animals unless mandatorily required by the relevant jurisdiction. But I think this really does open up over the next few years the ability for many of these brands overseas to enter the China market, because there was this dilemma. If you were a, you know, a brand that was, you know, trendy and going places in the West, you know, it would be very difficult with your Western consumers to sell in China. And for a lot of the cruelty-free, you know, organizations, and also for a lot of those beauty bloggers, selling in China, it was shorthand for animal testing. And so this will be something which allows these brands to manufacture overseas and bring them into China without having to do animal testing.
Great, thanks a lot, Mark. And just to clear it up for our viewers, we use the term non-special use, but you might see other articles from other places talk about ordinary cosmetics or maybe some other types, but we like to keep it simple, and we will refer to everything that's not special use cosmetic products or these ordinary cosmetic products as non-ordinary or non-special use. So Mark, we talked a little bit about, you know, the big change. So there are a few prerequisites required for companies that are looking to take advantage of this opportunity. Two in particular, could you give us a little bit of overview?
Okay, so I would stress that, yeah, it is a big change theoretically. I think it's going to take time to filter through, but people will have to start now thinking about their strategy going forward. And it could also even be for brands who've been in the China market or have only been doing global, you know, cross-border e-commerce sales. So I think, you know, what the Chinese authorities have come up with is the idea that you can sell these non-special use imported products through China through either what I would call is general import and general trade. So, you know, general import and general trade is you can actually import commercial quantities of a product. And so this would mean that you could bring it into China, and I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but you could bring it into China. You could like have a distributor who sells it through the local Tmall. You could get them to sell it through Sephora or Watson's or these other kind of, you know, beauty shops. So there's two main prerequisites. One is something which is called a quality management system for the manufacturer, so a QMS, which I think is very similar to GMP for pharmaceutical companies. And this is one which will be issued by the government authority or the certification organization of the country or region. So I think that's actually important to note. So this will be a bit of a problem for many countries. You know, it's not going to be, at least I don't think it's going to be EU level. So, you know, there'll be countries like France and Italy and Spain who might be moving very quickly. But then there may be, you know, other countries like Finland or other countries which may not have the same lobbying of cosmetics, but they still would have cosmetic companies. So I think one of the issues will be to check where your manufacturing base is. What's the status about whether this QMS certification is recognized? So That's the first issue you need to do. The second will be the product safety assessment. So you're going to have a product safety assessment which will fully confirm that the products are safe for human use. And of course, this is possible because we've got experience with this because of the domestic applications. So the Chinese authorities have accepted them in the past, and that the NMPA will review these based on materials that people submit. And of course, Western countries, EU countries, Australia, Israel, for many years, they've done away with animal testing. So of course, it can be done in a way which is safe but not involve animals.
All right, thanks a lot, Mark. And, like any good law, there are a number of exceptions. I would probably think that number 2 is probably the one that is on most people's minds. But if you could just run through all 3 of these exceptions for the audience, please.
Yeah, so I think number 1 and number 2 are kind of they're product very product related. So if it's going to be a product that has claims that is specifically related to children or infants, they will not be able to benefit from this exemption. So that will make a lot of companies that are targeting the children market, that's going to be a bit of a blow to them. But the second one, which is quite complicated, is if there's new cosmetic raw materials or new ingredients. And China has a list. It's not something that we really do. There's other people we work with who deal with this because this is more a scientific rather than legal issue. But basically, if the raw material or new ingredient is not on the list of what the NMPA recognizes and it's still in the safety monitoring period, again, you will not be able to get that exemption. And I think for a number of cosmetic companies, that can be difficult because quite often they do try to bring out new products with new ingredients, I guess for efficacy, but also as a bit of a marketing tool. So that will be something you'll have to check, and that will perhaps affect how you roll out your product into China, whether you can, actually bring in a product that you've launched overseas. You may not be able to launch it in China. And this is not, a peculiar thing. This is also things that we've seen with supplement companies, of those kind of companies, where many supplements will include a lot of caffeine, and a lot of those products aren't allowed to be, in these products under Chinese law, or the tolerance is different. So I think the ingredients will be a complicated issue for people. And then the third one, I don't know if it's really an exception. This is just rather, the brand or its responsible agent or the manufacturer is on a watch list. So, this is the opposite of a trusted trader type arrangement. So the NMPA does have a list of companies that it watches, and then these people are much more subject to spot checks and they are under supervision. And again, they will not be able to import the general cosmetics. So for most brands, if you've never entered China before, well, you won't be on there, but be careful who your manufacturer is, because that will be an issue to be checking. And then also this Chinese responsible agent, I think we saw in the new law that came in last year, responsible agent's been around for a long time, but it didn't really have teeth. I think now what we're finding is the responsible agent takes a lot of responsibility, a lot of liability, and so it will be difficult to find legitimate companies willing to take that liability for you, because sometimes people do cut corners, they do change the ingredient list, they do those kind of things, and that's why I think increasingly most cosmetic brands have to set up their own wholly foreign-owned enterprise in order to act as the Chinese responsible agent and as a distributor.
And while I think that you're right about number 1 and number 2 being more product oriented, number 3, I think while it is not, as strong as an exception as 1 and 2, it probably will have a lot more strategic effect in how do you approach partners, and also from the international side, but also from the Chinese side, like your local partners. If there's going to be a lot of responsibility placed on their shoulders, well, that's going to affect how they do business too. Speaking of the NMPA, we have here some of the certificates. The English part is a translation that we've come up with. This is something a case that we're working on, but the English parts on both of these are produced by us. The left one is kind of an older version of the NMPA. The right-hand side, you'll see it's a little bit more of an updated NMPA, but the information is pretty similar in what are they collecting. Mark, could you give us a little bit of, what is an NMPA certificate? How do people find it? What does it mean for our watchers?
Okay, so the NMPA certificates, I think the issue is those old ones you can see. Well, what's interesting in it is like responsible unit in China, none. Yeah, that won't happen anymore. So you definitely need a responsible agent. And so the NMPA certificate has a lot of information in it. Here we've only got the front page. And so, basically the law was before you could bring an imported product into China, to be distributed on the Chinese market, you'd have to have this NMPA authorization issued. And then a few years ago, without going into great detail because it's super complicated, but basically a few years ago, for non-special use, they made it a bit looser, which was you'd have to file for it. And then once the filing was accepted, you could import into China. But that still meant you had to do animal testing because the filing wouldn't be accepted until you did the animal testing. And so special use always needed to even wait till the NMPA certificate was issued. And so if you have a look at it, basically we would have the domestic responsible person, we have the production place. In the old one, very often, this one's not the case, but very often you wouldn't have had the brand. You'd actually have the brand as the manufacturer, even if they didn't have manufacturing. And so I think the NMPA, what also you can see, it's quite small in the bottom, technical requirements, product design, the label, and all these things. If you go onto the NMPA certificate, you can click onto those places and you can actually see the product, you can see the ingredients, you can also see the technical requirements. And this technical requirements shows the kind of testing that was done to them. And so, that's all very technical. So I think, this is interesting for people to note. And so I think, if you haven't done much in China at the moment, if you're importing it, your main concern will be the domestic responsible agent. Who is it? For most of you, it will be, in a year's time, a woofie, because you won't want to have the Chinese distributor be this because it gives them too much power, I think. And I think most consultants would be wary of taking on this very large liability. And then I think the other important thing is perhaps the ingredient list again, which shows the main ingredients. So I think that's the certificates. And so these are the certificates you need in order to be able to import product into China.
And Mark, are these publicly available documents?
Yeah, you can, if you know how to use it, you can get most of the information from the NMPA website. Just to stress again, this is to allow you to import an imported product. If you are selling via cross-border e-commerce, you don't need this certificate because that's an exception to being registered in China.
And I have a question from Saskia. Is the list that I think she's referring to the list of the watch lists. Are these on the NMPA website as well?
Well, that I would have to check. I think the watch list would be. I mean, if we're talking about lists, I mean the thing would be. I think the watch list would be on it. The list of not new ingredients. I think I can see it now. Not new ingredients. There won't be a list because you have to submit the ingredient, and the list of ingredients. I'm not the person that does this. We work with a very capable group called Knudsen & Co. And they've got a massive database, and there would be tens of thousands of ingredients, I guess. So, you'd have to talk to them about what is in. But I think normally people look at the ingredients and they check if it's on the list or not. That's how they do it.
Yeah, Saskia, the ingredients are very technical and it's something beyond the feeble.
You can even see it there. You can even see it there, the ingredients. I don't know what most of those things are.
All right. And we came up with a flow chart here of, is animal testing required? now that we, have this new opportunity in front of us, even though it might take some time, like you said. So just to give it in a very easy to digest way, Mark, can you just break it down? Is animal testing required for you?
Yeah, so I think, this is just if you're going to import the cosmetics. So special use, no way. Non-special use, well, firstly, are you failing one of those prerequisites, the children, the non-trusted party? I always forget what the third one is, that third one. And then I think, then whether you satisfy those requirements of the QMS and also the safety assessment. So I think, there is that path. But also one should remember, if we're non-special use and you're producing in China, and that can often be just the last piece of the production. In some cases, I think people got away with just doing the bottling. Then that is also a way to be able to, sell on the Chinese market without animal testing.
Great. And everybody here, if I will send this PPT to you, so no need to worry about taking pictures of the flowchart. But I think this is really what we came here to talk about today, Mark. And we know where we are in terms of context. We see what is coming up in terms of the loosening and some of these restrictions on animal testing. But what does that mean for us on a personal level and how we do business? So we have here a couple slides on some of the issues that we think could be affected based off of this new regulation. Mark, could you please start with this slide, please?
Yeah, so I think one of the issues is, the product registration's also much more now about the manufacturer as well. And so I think, it's also explicit. If you have, like, let's say you have product A and you manufacture it in Mexico, and you manufacture it in France, and you manufacture it in Australia, then all the manufacturers which are supplying the Chinese market, they will all need to have the QMS certification. So that may mean that it will really lead to a lot of production shopping. So when a company wants to supply the Chinese market for a specific imported good, they may need to prioritize, say, France over Mexico in that example. So I think that will be an issue. So I think that's something to look at. And then I think what I actually think will happen is probably it will be a little bit similar, because I think often the Chinese authorities, they act in a similar way very often. And if we look back at things like beef and also things like infant formula, perhaps even more infant formula, where the Chinese authorities said, okay, in order to import infant formula into China, we need to certify the factories, we need to inspect them overseas, and we have to approve them. So I think this may also happen at some stage with cosmetics as well. So in order to get that safety assessment, then maybe the Chinese authorities, cosmetics is such a big business compared to infant formula, so many more SKUs and everything, that may take time. And then I think one of the issues will be, if you're in a country that doesn't really have a good relationship with China, let's say at the moment, Australia probably doesn't have the best relationship, they'll probably be waiting at the back of the queue to get this bilateral agreement to recognize the certification. So I think this will be one of the issues which will bedevil many of the people watching today.
And we have here pictures of France, Japan, South Korea, and Mark kind of alluded to it before, but these are countries that we just think probably have a strong cosmetics lobby, and this bilateral agreement is probably something that will be pursued strongly by.
So I think like France has already announced, like the French authority announced that they've been recognized, but I don't think the Chinese have admitted that. And then I think South Korea and Japan, you do read that they're coming close, and like you say, all three are really cosmetic superpowers, and so you wouldn't think that they were perhaps the three most leading animal rights countries in the world, so it's interesting, but they'll probably be the front runners to get these certifications accepted.
Yeah, that's true. So how does this how will this affect distribution? I think there's two aspects here, and we have, you mentioned it earlier, cross-border e-commerce through something like Tmall Global, for example. But then you also have the domestic version or just Tmall. And then you also have offline, maybe something like a Sephora, for example, brick and mortar. So how do you see this this playing out in respect of these three channels?
So I think we also had a client that was selling on Tmall Global and selling on Tmall, and really from memory it was something like 84% of sales was Tmall. So Tmall is a much bigger platform. I think you will find that a lot of those Tmall Global sales will end up on the domestic websites, etc. So that will really affect a lot of those middlemen who are doing the global Tmall type activation. And I think also if you are selling well on Tmall Global, you're probably going to have a massive boost once you hit the other, more local websites, not just Tmall, but perhaps the ones that are more, bespoke for cosmetics. So I think that's going to be a big thing. And then, like you say, with Sephora, that's an offline channel. I think really when we talk to Western cosmetic companies, they are a bit obsessed with online, because a lot of them just want to do online because of the global cross-border e-commerce is an exception. But I think in the reality, especially if you want to get to the second, third, and fourth tier cities in China, it's really offline that makes a big difference. And so I think you will find that if you thought you had a lot of Chinese distributors chasing you a few months ago, I think as this picks up steam, you will have many, many distributors reaching out, because this will be a big business. And then I think there'll be competition, as always. There's always a lot of people that want to do things for you in China, but picking the ones who are the right ones with a track record. So you're going to have to be a bit careful and also pick the right distributor. Yeah.
And I put here screenshots of the Tmall Global and the Tmall website. And I highlighted here in the ovals just the offerings that they have in terms of their products. I mean, the difference is night and day. For a lot of people who are not really familiar with China, it's really hard to overstate how much more popular Tmall is compared to the global version. I mean, just look at the product listing, for example. I mean, you can even buy a car on Tmall, but Tmall Global strikes me more of as a kind of a what you would find in an airport, those types of things. It's not really where you go for shopping. All right. And also, we kind of mentioned it earlier, Mark. There was an exception to the rule back in 2014, I believe you said, where you can manufacture domestically, and this would allow you to get around some of the animal testing requirements. But with this new provisions out, this this may affect the way that do you still need a factory in China, and how does my Hong Kong presence actually fit into the entire Asia puzzle? But I know you have some interesting thoughts about how this all plays out. So please share with us.
I think, look, my guess is there will be, this will be welcome, and people can start selling a little bit more in a kind of a way. And, they can start putting stuff in Sephora, and that'll help people a bit. But I think what we will see is, there are these very professional, large OEM manufacturers in China for every business, including cosmetics. I think this idea of doing the domestic manufacturing and getting the animal testing exemption, I think it's going to actually pick up steam, because I think what will happen is there'll be a lot of media attention. A lot of people will have to answer questions from their boards. Why aren't we in China now that you can import without animal testing? And it's going to be very difficult to explain to people, well, we have to wait for the factory certified, we have to wait for the bilateral agreement, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a period of time that people will be thinking, oh, this will be simple. I just, put it on a ship and send it to China. I've got a feeling it won't happen. I think we're going to see a lot of these cruelty-free brands come to the realization that it's going to be easier to, actually outsource the manufacturing and do it under a domestic animal testing exemption. And I think that's what the Chinese authorities also want. Also with the infant formula, there's imported infant formula coming in, but it's still a niche. All the big infant formula producers ended up manufacturing it. And I think, a lot of brands will say, well, we've got the heritage, or people buying it because it was, made from France, or it's made in Spain and that stuff. I think the Chinese consumer is also moving a bit. So I don't want to underplay it, but my guess is, in reality, we will see more cosmetics coming into China, but people will be someone to manufacture them in China. On the Hong Kong issue, look, I think people have been rethinking Hong Kong for a long time. I think Hong Kong as a gateway to China, I think that was a long time ago. So I think what we've seen with COVID is how much of the Chinese spend can be spent here. And that means the VAT and customs duty and all that. And so I think the days when Hong Kong was a place, that might have been 10, 15 years ago. But now I think, I don't know how much people in Hong Kong, maybe 8 million or whatever, compared to 1.4 billion in the rest of China. I think it's very clear that people will be wanting to come directly into China. So I think a lot of those people who've had things like, I think Body Shop's there, I think Blush is in Hong Kong. A lot of those people that have been, perhaps targeting Chinese consumers from Hong Kong, they'll probably be the first ones that will try to start, ramping up their engagement with China.
Thanks a lot, Mark. And this is the last slide. So I'd just like to remind everybody, if you do have any questions, even just thoughts, you can just put it in the chat, and I'll get it to Mark by the end of this slide here. But these are kind of the final points that we wanted to make. It's hard to kind of, group them or separate them. So we kind of just lump them here together. Some of the consequences, I guess, of the regulations here. We kind of mentioned them before, Mark, piece by piece, but maybe we can go into a little bit more detail into your reasonings.
Okay, well, I think we just summarize it. I think the greater obligations and paperwork is, I think, what's happened is people felt that China was inside a, like a bubble. It was very hard for cosmetic companies to come in, etc. And I think what the Chinese authorities are doing, and on the one hand, it's justifiable, there's increasingly strict regulations. So if you look at those regulations, which were issued last year, you had to hire a person that has health and safety experience for 10 years. There's a lot of improved health and safety standards. And so legitimately, that's to protect Chinese consumers. Also, that domestic representative, I know I've mentioned a lot, there's an expanded role, and there's really a lot of potential liability. And so I think, China cosmetics is big business now. And, much less if there's even like a health issue, but if the brand has lied on its ingredient list, which is not as uncommon as people would think, whoever is your domestic representative, they could really be facing the fire. So I think the China market is very lucrative. It's probably the biggest market in the world. But I think what's going to be happening is people are going to have to take it seriously. So that's why I think most people have to set up WWOOFies. They will have to be the domestic representative themselves, and they're going to have to do more compliance work. And then on the QMS, I think I've said that a bit too often already, it's bilateral. And so I think it really will depend who's got a strong lobby group and who's in or out of favor with China, at least for these first few years. And then I think the potential overseas inspection, this is just what I'm thinking, but I'm guessing over time, they may start inspecting like they do the abattoirs or the beef manufacturing plants or the infant formula plants. So I think this will be something that we will see more of as time goes on.
Thanks a lot for that, Mark. We have a question here. What would be your best guess as to when brands could import and sell via the revised imported cosmetics route without animal testing?
I think it will really depend on how quickly the first bilateral agreement is, signed. So like I said, I think the French, even a few weeks ago, before the regulations came out, they were kind of saying that they had something. We haven't seen anything from the NMPA yet. So I think what will happen is, once it's probably, I'm guessing it's going to be the French, then I think the other things like the QMS, that's to tie it up with that. I think the safety assessment, that's a trodden path that people know. So I think it will really depend which country you're in. And I'm guessing you'll see something this year, where the first ones will come in. But I think we'll see a lot more domestic manufacturing under those kind of leaping bunny exemptions, because I think the heat will go away from people selling in China, because people will realize if it's non-special use cosmetics, there are ways to bring it into China. So I think there'll be less media attention on those things.
Maybe I'll just piggyback off that question with the question of my own. Outside of cosmetics, we usually see other retail companies. They kind of start off with a cross-border approach, but eventually it turns out that China is the market for them, or one of the most important markets for them. And as that business grows, they do end up, producing domestically, to save costs, to make it more convenient, to issue fapiaos, these invoices, for a variety of reasons. When you say that you think that manufacturing will actually increase as a result of this domestically, is that what you are kind of, is that kind of the logic here?
I just think it's like, Timor Global is only for a small part of the population, for a small part of their spend. And so I think, it will be, it'll be just more mainstream. I think, like you said, Timor Global is a bit like a duty-free shop if you don't go traveling. And so, and you can't, I don't think, I'm not really sure, but I can't imagine people buy on Timor Globe for gifting either, because I don't know about the invoicing would be all understood, etc. And, I think that's the issue, the customs and VAT. So I think for a variety of reasons, in reality, and the main reason is, I think China has a much bigger interest in having a strong domestic manufacturing industry than helping overseas cosmetic companies sell their product. So that's why I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of compelling reasons why there'll be more and more manufacturing here.
All right, we got another question. How can we find out which countries have already secured the QMS bilateral agreement?
And I think you just have to watch the news. They'll be screaming it from the headlines. I mean, I think it will be quite, I think if you're subscribing to any cosmetic type information, this will be a big story, especially the first one will be a big one. So you might want to reach out to your local association to see what is happening, what's the steps, what they're doing. And so that would be interesting for countries who perhaps where beauty is not their biggest focus. I could imagine a lot of the governments haven't really been paying a lot of attention to this.
Yeah. We have another question. Is animal testing for the end product or for each used ingredient? How can we prove that the products or ingredients have not been tested on animals? We kind of talked, Mark, I'll let you speak to this, but as a law firm, we're not really ingredient experts. This is more of a scientific thing than a legal point. So we usually just leave that to the experts who deal with the ingredients.
But I think just on that, I think the ingredients, new ingredients have to be tested. So China would have a lot of ingredients, like I said, be probably tens of thousands, I don't know, but thousands for sure. And so a lot of those products have been around for a long time, those ingredients, everybody knows that water is, safe or things like that. So a lot of the ingredients will be on that list of safety, etc. But I think cosmetic companies, they do bring out new ingredients because they're always looking for a new edge or a marketing edge. And so those ingredients or those new formulations, they will have to be tested, and they would be tested on animals.
And if you're looking for an expert in ingredients, you can send me a message or email later, and I can put you in touch with someone that we work with who usually does this type of stuff. We have another question here. According to your experience with cosmetics clients, who usually takes care of these topics, legal, compliance, regulatory, supply chain?
Who takes care of them?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I'm guessing it means uh, who would help advise on uh, these issues.
Well, I think yeah. Well, I think it would be look if we're talking about input. So I think this is really the problem. Yeah, it used to be that the cosmetic companies would just do it and let their Chinese distributor run away with it or just do whatever. And I think now the requirements have become much more sophisticated. And so if the China market, so there's the health and safety requirements are much higher. There's a lot more red tape, to use that word. And it used to be the responsible agent really was just the person that would hand in the documents, and there wasn't really the issue of liability. But now I'd say in the last year, that's really changed. So I think how people used to do it is not how they can continue to do it. And the Chinese consumer can be quite a capricious, group to deal with. If something goes wrong, there'll be a media storm about it. So I think people have to take it very seriously and have to ensure that they comply with the Chinese laws. And I think, increasingly headquarters will be involved in these things. But I think most companies, if they have a sizable business, they will need a small, wholly foreign-owned enterprise. I think it's better than having a Chinese distributor do it, and they should be your domestic responsible agent, and then it will be your people. I think, going forward, not so many people will want to have responsible agents outside of their organization.
I guess I got a clarification here about who deals with these issues, who takes care of these issues, who monitors the developments, who advises on specific questions, because it's not really a legal function.
Yeah. So I think, look, this is just my experience, not really a kind of a legal issue, but I think the people's teams on the ground, they will find out if there's issues. So I think, if you're talking about logistics or the importing or these kind of compliance issues, probably the distributor, if you only have a distributor, or your local Chinese team will be the ones that find out these issues. Either they've heard something in the market or they're in trouble themselves. And that's normally how it gets done. I think there's not many cosmetic companies that regularly ask for, an update on the law. Because the law, that law that came in last year, that law was, the previous law was in place when the Berlin Wall was still around. So, it was around for 30 years. So, the cosmetic law wasn't fast moving. There was always a few tinkering of regulations, etc. But really, it's been pretty static for a long time. So I think, people cosmetic companies have been very reactive. They haven't been proactive. So they normally wait until there's a media blitz or they're in trouble or somebody else they've heard of is in trouble.
All right, I think that's all the questions. And I guess, I'll add to that answer. A lot of the stuff that, you talk about here on the channel is legal in nature, but also based off of just your experience in, helping businesses in China. And you can find some of those topics and videos on our YouTube channel. It's not specifically a cosmetics issue that, the viewer is asking about. This is something that quite commonly our clients will flick us something they see on the news and just say, hey, what do you think about this? And then, Mark, you're always pretty open and generous with your time. We could just say, this kind of strikes us similar to, a previous law that was passed in a similar industry, and, just kind of give our 2 cents on these types of things. So if you, have something like that, Mark's information is here, and you can check out the YouTube channel. And if you can click subscribe, that'll be excellent. And and our Art of Law webinar series is usually every other Friday, and that'll be the next one is this Friday. And I will send the PPT to everybody here that was registered through the Eventbrite link. And that's it. So thank you everybody for joining, and look forward to talking with you later. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Sean. Bye, everybody.
Bye.